Welcome back to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that can make or break your podcast appearances. It's all about crafting the perfect calls to action. That moment where you help your listeners take that next step and without you sounding pushy or salesy on that. Joining me today is Tiffany Meenk. She's our marketing manager here at Interview Valet, and she's been on the front lines helping founders, nonfiction authors, and category designers just like you turn their interviews into genuine marketing opportunities. You'll hear us break down how to weave the calls to action naturally into conversations, why those 3 yeses matter, and how to think about your intention before you ever hit record. Because here's the thing, podcast interviews are not sales calls. They're conversations. But when you have the right intention and clear next steps for the listeners, they become powerful tools to build relationships, trust, and ultimately your business. If you've ever wondered how to invite listeners to learn more without turning your interview into an infomercial, this episode's for you. So let's get to it. On a podcast interview, we always talk about what do you want the listener to think, believe, or feel, and what do you want them to do? Today, we're here with Tiffany Meenk, our marketing manager, talking about the to-do, the call to action. Tiffany, welcome.
Hi, Tom. Thanks. It's always great to be here.
Yeah. So unpack this a little bit. People struggle with, well, how do I make a call to action, right? When our clients come to us, what concerns and questions do they have?
You know, we work with a lot of founders and CEOs, right? They can do their sales pitch in their sleep. They know that inside and out. But podcasting is a different platform. It's not a sales call. You're not trying to do a pitch. You're having a conversation, educating an audience on your service, what you do, your expertise to add value to them, right? So I think a lot of the podcast guests that I've talked to, their question focuses around that. It's like kind of 2 parts of their brain, right? It's like, how do I incorporate my sales, my call to action to lead those listeners back without being salesy? So that's something I talk to them a lot about. And I think the first step there is to kind of work backwards from your intention with podcasting, right? Like you said, what do you want that audience to walk away thinking, feeling, believing about you at the end? And building the steps backwards to that.
Yeah. And I see that sometimes as a spectrum, right? We've got some people that come and they're like the Glengarry Glen Ross, always be closing. It's like, no, that doesn't work on a podcast, right? This is not an infomercial. But then on the other side, you've got the people that say, well, I'm just there to educate. I don't want to say anything, right? Well, it's got to be in the middle there because you've got to help people to take that next step. And I always think of that Rabbi Daniel Lapin wrote a great book called Thou Shalt Prosper. And I love how he talks about it, that if you believe that your solution, your service, your product can help somebody, well, at the end of the podcast, you do them a disservice if you don't tell them what the next step is, right? To put it out there. The idea that we can solve everybody's problem in a 30-minute conversation isn't going to happen. So it should almost come in naturally is what that next step is.
Right. And that's the biggest thing I talk to podcast guests about is how to incorporate it into the conversation organically, make it an extension of that conversation. And this is something David Bonney, the CEO of 45IO, talks about a lot. It's like becoming the solver of your ideal client's problems, right? Think about your clients who you talk to, your prospects. What questions do they typically have? What do they need you to solve? And then use that in your conversations. Be like, example here today, Tom, a lot of the clients I work with have questions about, their marketing message and their calls to action. I know that as my target audience. So you lead it into the discussion, right? So, Tom, if you have a question about will podcast interview marketing work for me, head over to my website. Over there, I have an assessment, and you can find out if it makes sense for your business. Um, it's incorporating it in there. So if you use it in that language, it's not salesy. It's a natural part of the conversation.
Yeah, and it's not this. I always have a problem when people use it like digital marketing, right? Limited supply, act now. That's salesy, right? That's not appropriate for a podcast. But to have that idea of what's the next step, and you talked about working it in the conversation. I think you can even work it in before you hit record. Right. So when you're talking with the podcast host at the very beginning, one of the things that we teach is to ask, right? The host, I'm so happy to be here. What are you trying to get out of this? What can I do to give value? And then they always come back to you and say, well, what are you hoping to get out of it? And you can always say, well, I've got some offers, some things that will help your listeners. I've made this page for them. There's an assessment. I'll give them a free copy of my book, and I'll even, give them a free discovery call, and those things. And it's great because if you do that, often it's the host that brings it up and not you. So you don't have to even sound salesy. You just have to respond to what they lead with.
So that's a great point, Tom. Like asking the host ahead of the call is a great opportunity because they know their audience, right? They know what their listeners are looking for, what their interests are. And then it's great. Then you can how to adjust your message during that conversation, during that recording. Um, So, yeah, and that's a great point too with the host bringing it up for you. Then it's not you doing your little plug, your elevator pitch. And because most guests are going on a show with some intention, right? Whether that's to gain brand awareness, they have a new book coming out, they're trying to drive people to a new product or service or, just build up their clientele. So if the host knows that's your objective, a good host will naturally lead the conversation toward that for you. Um, and that ties into too, if you ping that to me, hey, I hear you have a book out, and what was the title of that book? Tell me about it again. And then that gives the guest an opportunity to say, oh yeah, podcast guest profits. I actually have a free copy on my website over there. Your listeners are welcome to visit interviewvalet.com/Tiffany and get a copy over there, right? Because again, it's adding value without being salesy.
And you use the word intention. I think that is so important. If you're just going on podcasts as a hobby, right? If you're just podcast guesting, you don't have to have an intention, right? Just go in there and talk, right? Random conversations. But if your intention is to build credibility, to get leads, to get authority, even to get indexed by AI and to make that your best referral partner there, then you've got to show up with an intention. Who am I? Why am I here? And that idea of, what do I want the audience to think, believe, and do afterwards? So starting with the end in mind.
Absolutely. Because if you don't have that site at the end of your conversation, then you will kind of be all over the place. You're not going to be driving toward any central point or purpose there. It will be like an aimless conversation on both sides. So yeah, absolutely. Intention is so important. I know that's something we talk with our guests the most probably about, it's nailing down that message. Again, going back to you're a founder, you're a CEO, your sales pitch, your product, but how does that translate into podcasting? And I think when you take some time to really muddle through that and what that means, then it'll become more obvious of how to interject your services or your guides or something like that into the conversation.
Yeah. And the CTA, the call to action, comes from digital marketing. And sometimes, there's always one CTA, but podcasts are different, right? You want to meet people where they are and give them different ways to say yes. Can you unpack that a little bit on how that's different from if you're doing a CTA on a Facebook ad and if you're doing a call to action on a podcast?
Yeah, and again, an intention here being the key word. Facebook, if you're scrolling through social media, your feed, it's like, hey, click this article, 7 things you should know about the lake this year or something. We were talking about summer. And that's an easy. Do I want that? Yes or no? Do I want to find out more? No. But podcasting is different, right? The medium is different. Your audience is different. They're not mindlessly doom scrolling. They're listening in because they have an intention too, right? To learn something, to get something out of it, to hear a new perspective. And so what we've found over a decade of doing this is that really in this space, having 3 calls to action translates so much better than having one, a yes or no option. Because it's about, again, meeting people where they are. And we call them the 3 yeses, the small yes, the medium yes, and the heck yes. And what that does is you have somebody that just wants to learn more. They can click the 7 things to know right now. If you have somebody that's a little bit more invested, you can offer your book, you can offer a webinar, you can offer a small course or a guide or a report, or the heck yes people that show up and I'm like, I loved everything Tom had to say. I want to talk to him, right? I want to get him on the phone or on a Zoom call and see what he's about. I want to talk to him firsthand. And I think that too with podcasting, you're listening to someone, you're kind of in their ear a little bit, you feel like you're getting to know them. And so the extension of offering a consultation or a free call with them feels natural to them. It's not clicking on a Facebook ad, book a call, right? I don't know this person. I don't know his voice. I don't know if I want to talk to him yet. But on a podcast, they've kind of already decided that.
And sometimes you got to remember who you're speaking with. I can think of a client came to us one time and said, I want to target Fortune 500 CEOs. I'm like, yeah, you can do that, but there's not a podcast called the Fortune 500 CEO with 500 downloads an episode, right? Those people probably aren't making the decision, right? They're not listening to the podcast. So you have to go to the influencers. And if all that you give them is, sign up, discovery call, whatever it is, they may not be in a position that they've got the authority to do that. So by giving them different yeses, sometimes you can give them something that they can refer to the other people, right? I think of a client that we worked with, right? They worked with men's coaching, right? This is also true in the health side, right? That the women in the household are the influencers, right? They make the decisions, they make the appointments, all the rest of that. So often it wasn't like just jump on a call here, but here's an assessment we have. Here's questions to ask. And you put your logo on it, your branding, everything like that. So when they print it out, when they share it, all right, now you can get back there. So you've got to figure out, not are you talking to the decision maker or are you trying to talk to an influencer? And with that, make sure you've got something that's valuable to both of them.
Yeah, that's a great point you make there because I mentioned meeting them where they are, right? Not where you are. And that applies to positions within the company. Like you said, maybe it's your executive assistant or a colleague in another respect. What they're going to do is they're going to read your 7 things to know, or they're going to watch your 30-minute webinar or something, or look through your course, and they can bring that to the decision maker and say, hey, like, this was really interesting, or this is a great way to do this, or we should, this is something we can implement in our business, or, and that's a way to connect. And that goes back to what podcasting is too, is sharing it. Like you mentioned earlier, the limited time offer that doesn't translate in this platform at all. You don't know when somebody's going to listen to an episode. They could listen to it the day after it goes live, or they could listen to it 3-4 years from now. So having a limited offer on there, because what they're going to do, if you say 30-day offer and they're watching your episode 2 years from now and you call them and they still have that offer, you've immediately broken their trust, because you're not good on your word. You told me this is a 30-day offer, and now 2 years later, you still have it running, right? So it's got to be evergreen in some respect there.
You talked about this. Let's talk about some of the calls to action that just don't work on a podcast, right? I'm going to throw in one there, newsletter, right? Come back to our website and sign up for our free newsletter, right? I don't know if that I've paid for a newsletter. So it's not like it's a great free value. And what I'm hearing there is no specificity. It's not specific. We'll put it that way. It's the idea of all you want is my email address, right? I don't want something else in my email box. So make it sure it's something that's valuable and specific to me. Can you think of any other ones where it's just like, yeah, this call to action just doesn't work on a podcast?
I think the biggest one that I see, and every time I hear it, I'm like, oh, they dropped the ball there, is at the end when the host says, "So, Tom, where can our listeners find you?" And they're like, "Well, my LinkedIn is over here. This is my Twitter or my X handle. This is my email address. Here's my website." And you're like, oh, nobody is ever going to remember that. That that's the biggest one that I'm like, oh, that you messed up there. Don't do that.
Well, I'm going to play off of that because we both still call it Twitter, right? But it's X, right? And if you call it Twitter, it's like, it's understandable today. But if somebody hears that 3 years from now, you could lose credibility with that. One of them that strikes me too is that when people say, go back to my website, www. dot whatever. It's like, no, it's not Y2K anymore, right? You don't even have to put the W's anymore. All the websites work without that. So you don't have to just add that. You sound old and archaic. Just give them the website to go to.
And that the Twitter X thing, it's like it was Twitter to us for how long? Now it's X. But yeah, it immediately gives it a shelf life. Like you said, if they hear your interview and you say, go over to my Twitter, it immediately puts a timestamp on it. And okay, this is dated. And then it's like, okay, is the information you're sharing dated, right? And you're not current. How can I trust you to make forward-thinking decisions if you don't have the most current information? I know habits are hard to break. I made it myself there, quickly corrected course, but that's a great one. And those are just things that people do, I think, without giving it much thought. Even like we were talking about, you're showing up to do your message, right? So probably as you're doing your pre-interview planning, you're sitting there and you're practicing, oh, I want to hit this point and that point. And it's like, how much time are they spending on the goal? Where do I want to drive people back to at the end of this? How do I make that bridge from that listener who's got me in their AirPods to back to my website or back to engaging with me on a personal call or something. And so I think that's another place where guests drop the ball, is making that bridge. I brought up how they give 5 different resources to go find you online. We tell guests to resolve that problem to use a welcome page, right? That gives all of those different platforms and mediums and calls to action that you would use in your conversation on that show. It's all in one place. So however they want to connect with you, whether it's one of your calls to action, whether it's on X, whether it's on LinkedIn, they can do that. They can meet you where they want to meet you.
Yeah. And I think we've got to remember the medium, right? Different mediums are different and the rules don't apply to the same, right? So if we're on television and I'm talking about my book, I've probably got a picture of my book across behind me, right? If I'm on radio, every time they come back from commercial, they'll say, "Oh, we're here with so-and-so, author of this." On a podcast, you have to mention the name of the book because nobody's going to remember that. Or what you were talking about, the evergreen nature of a podcast. I've heard authors say, "My book comes out in September." That's sort of meaningless because if I'm listening to it in August, does that mean it's coming out next month? Or is this podcast old and it's already out? Or worse yet, if somebody has a live event, right? They do retreats. I remember talking to people about this. Don't tell them your next retreat is July 16th because, it's going to stop me from doing things, right? I'll say, "Oh, I'm out of town for that. I don't have enough. I just missed it." Just say, "We've got retreats coming up. We've got live events coming up all the time. We've got great locations for these. Just come back and find the next one," right? Because that keeps it evergreen. You would never say that, on a newspaper ad or maybe on radio. But remember, podcasts are evergreen. So make your offers evergreen with those also.
Absolutely. Like you said, which September? And it gives the listener, again, just another thing to be like, "Oh, I missed it," or, just to tune it out. They tick that off as a no in their head, and then they kind of start to tune you out. I think the BABA, the Build a Better Agency Summit, is a great example of this. They have that website up year round. And whether it's talking about the next upcoming one or the one that just occurred, but that website is always there. So if they're referencing that in their marketing anywhere, podcast, on radio, TV, it's always there. So they can always be driving people to the next thing. And even if it's, we just did this year's event, right? And so we got another 6 months or a year until our next one, they can still engage with you. Be like, "Oh, well, get on our mailing list for future dates or future information. Or in the meantime, here's a book, or here's a course, here's a recording of our recent event." Again, it's connecting with them and making it easy for them to get back to your site and connect with you.
Calls to action. It's an important part of the interview. It's a stressful part, but I think the biggest thing, and you always talk about this, is don't make it sound like a sales pitch, right? Make it sound like it's coming from the heart to help someone.
Because at the bottom of what podcast guesting is that it's a genuine conversation. It's just banter back and forth, learning from each other, learning new ways of seeing things or thinking about things. And so that's what you want to do. And people will naturally weed themselves out, as far as if they come to your site or engage with you further. So then when people do come to you, they are more engaged. They've self-selected to be there. And so it's just better all around. It's a win-win.
Yeah, it's at times it sound like banter, right? But there's intention behind it. There's something that they're trying to follow, right? A topic, a theme. They won't know what they want people to think, what they feel and do. So, Tiffany, thank you so much for sharing this. I hope people will take action on this because podcasts are such a powerful medium to grow your business, to make AI your best referral source. But podcast guesting doesn't just do it, right? Just standing up and talking doesn't do it. You've got to be intentional, and the calls to action are a big part.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thanks for having me, Tom.
Wow. What a conversation. Tiffany shared so many insights on how to show up intentionally and authentically in every podcast interview, especially when it comes to those call to actions. Remember, your CTA isn't just about driving leads or making fast sales. It's about meeting your audience where they are and offering them real value, whether that's a downloadable resource, a deeper conversation, or just a way to keep learning from you. As Tiffany shared, think about your small yes, your medium yes, and your heck yes offers, because not everyone's ready to book a call today, but they are ready to take the next step when you invite them to. And don't forget, ask the host before you even start recording how you can best serve their audience. That's where the real connections begin. So here's your actionable takeaway. Take a few minutes today to review your own calls to action on a podcast interview. Are they aligned with your intention? Do they feel natural and authentic? And are they easy for listeners to say yes to from a podcast? Because at the end of the day, podcast interviews are your chance to move listeners to becoming your hot leads and profitable clients. Make the most of them. Thanks for joining us. And until next time, don't just try podcast guesting. Drive real business results with podcast interview marketing.